Hello, YouTube, and welcome back to yet another book review from me, your host, Logan Albright. Today, we're back with more Anthony Burgess. I know you guys like when I do Anthony Burgess, and I like when I do it too. So I'm continuing the series of trying to get through all of the several dozen Anthony Burgess novels. This is one I picked up the last time I was in the UK. I was in Scotland, and they have his books over there. It's so frustrating to me in America whenever I go into a bookstore and I want to get an Anthony Burgess book, and I look and they have a Clockwork Orange, and they have nothing else. Then like 35 novels he wrote. The only thing they could be bothered to stock is a Clockwork Orange. Fortunately, in the UK, that's not the case, and I picked up a few books there, and this was one of them. This is The Wanting Seed by Anthony Burgess. Came out in 1963, the same year as A Clockwork Orange, and is kind of meant, I think, as a companion volume to that, in that they both deal with dystopian questions, kind of future speculation about what society might be like and how it might all go wrong for all of us. This is a very different book from A Clockwork Orange. A Clockwork Orange is famous for having a very experimental language, a lot of invented slang, a lot of kind of acrobatics with Burgess's writing technique, which I really like about him. And I like when he goes on these sort of linguistic tours of forces like he did in that book, or like he did in the Napoleon Symphony and several other of his works. This book is not really like that. It's much more straightforward as a narrative. It basically is written like any other novel, although I do think Burgess is great at writing. I think this is a weird thing to say, but this is something that stood out to me as I was reading this. He always picks the exact right length for his sentences. His sentences are the perfect mix of like a short one and a long one. They're not too long, they're not too short. They mix perfectly, and I just found that rhythm really satisfying when I read his work, so I enjoyed that. But this is not like the crazy linguistic feats of prowess that he often likes to do in his books. This is sort of just a straightforward story. The plot revolves around a married couple. They are named Tristram, and the wife is Beatrice Joanna, and they are living in a world in the not too distant future where overpopulation is the dominant concern of society, and the government has implemented all these controls to try to prevent the population from going up, such as mandatory birth control and things, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a bit. And their child has just died through some apparently government neglect, and they're very upset about this. And it ends up that Beatrice Joanna gets impregnated and is going to have another child, which is against the law, and the paternity of the child is somewhat in doubt. Meanwhile, Tristram is a history teacher, and it is through his teaching that I think we kind of get the central idea of the novel, which is the thing I found most interesting. I really feel like this story is not so much about the characters, it's more about the ideas in the novel. But after Tristram is kind of discovers that his wife is pregnant and thinks that he might not be the father, he goes a little nuts. He ends up getting arrested mistakenly as part of a protest, and then he ends up in the army where he has to go fight a war overseas. So that's sort of the basic outline of the plot. But to me, there's also things like cannibalism starts up, and the war is kind of designed to reduce the population. So all these themes of overpopulation are big. And I think that's something that Burgess sort of got wrong because he has this sort of Malthusian idea that the future is going to be super crowded and packed, and they'll have to control the population. And in fact, what people are complaining about now is that the birth rate is too low and that we don't have enough people having children. So kind of missed that one. It's like the Malthus got this wrong, and Burgess got this wrong as well. But to me, the more interesting idea of the novel comes in a lecture given by Tristram to his class about the cycles of history. And this is a theory that Tristram at least has, and I don't know if Burgess shares it, but he's exploring the idea in this novel anyway, that history comes in cycles and society comes in cycles. And that at present they're in a cycle where the dominant view of human nature is that men are basically good, and that you can maybe perfect them with policy and with steering them in the right direction, and you want to be a little bit liberal with them, and you can, striving for a better society through things like socialism, where we share everything and, have the direction of mankind's nature is sort of being pushed towards being better and better according to the people who advocate this sort of thing. And then that doesn't work because, of course, it doesn't, and that's not the way people are. And the society realizes that this has been a mistake, and they overcorrect. And there's an interphase, an in-between phase, which basically the government descends into totalitarianism and just rules everybody with an iron fist. And then when that sort of burns itself out and people realize that this is untenable, they go back to what he calls the Augustinian phase, which is a more religious view, a less rational view, a more superstitious view of society that holds that men are basically fallen creatures, that they're basically bad and they have to be controlled by things like religion and the state. And you get a much more paternalistic type of society there before, people do a little bit better than the Augustinians expect them to do, and you slide back into this idea of perfecting mankind again, and you end up back in the, I forget what he calls it. It's a reference to some ancient thinker who I'm not familiar with, but you end up back in this phase where, we try to give people the benefit of the doubt again, and then it just repeats over and over again. And the action of this novel takes place in the interphase, just as we're moving back towards a more negative view of human nature, and it's all the chaos and the violence that go along with that. And that's why we see the cannibalism, and that's why we see this crazy government acting out in this way and persecuting people so strongly. And that's sort of the idea of the book, I think. And that's an interesting idea. It's not an idea that I personally subscribe to, because it has echoes of sort of a Marxian, Hegelian arc of history view, in which history is sort of predetermined and you can sort of predict what's going to happen, although they had much more of a linear, progressive view of history, and this is a cyclical view. But I don't think that's really the way history works. I don't think you can predict it in those broad terms, because I think it's more about individual action and people making decisions, which is never entirely predictable. So I don't agree with the central premise of the book, but I think it's an interesting thought experiment, and I enjoyed reading about it. I don't think the plot is that thick, and I don't think the characters are that impressive. This book didn't blow me away like a lot of Anthony Burgess's books have. I enjoyed reading it. I thought it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed the thought experiment. It gave me stuff to think about. But overall, I wouldn't count it as one of his greater novels, and it's a little disappointing in the shadow of A Clockwork Orange, which is such a masterpiece, to read a more or less boilerplate dystopian novel. It's sort of what you would expect out of any dystopian novel. And I just came off reading his other dystopian novel, or novella rather, called 1985, which is a very similar theme, and it paints a similar picture of what the future would be like. And I do think what we're seeing in Britain right now, and to a lesser extent in America, with the government kind of taking a more strong hand towards controlling people and censorship and policing speech and stuff, he sort of is prophetic in that sense, although the population stuff I think he got wrong. So it's interesting to read in a modern context, written some 60 years after it was published, and see how the echoes in real life happen. But the story was not as interesting as I had hoped it would be, and the linguistic flair with which he wrote it was not as dramatic as I was hoping it would be. That being said, I like any book that points out kind of the cruelty of the government and the senselessness of war. Those are always fun things, and Burgess seems to have a real liberal streak in his writing, where he comes back to those themes again and again about how inhuman the government can be towards its citizens, and how evil war is. And those are always themes that are worth exploring, so I enjoyed that a lot. But overall, I'd say an average Anthony Burgess novel, not an exceptional one. It's certainly worth reading if you are a big fan of him like I am, or if you like dystopian novels in general and you think those are fun. But I wouldn't count it among my top 3 or maybe even my top 5 so far. I think I've read 8 Anthony Burgess novels so far, so I've got a lot more to go. I do have a couple more on my shelf, on my to-be-read shelf, so I will be coming back to Burgess pretty soon, relatively soon. But I have a lot of other things to get to in the meantime as well. So stay tuned for my next review. You never know what it's going to be. It could be something new. It could be something old. It could be something foreign. It could be something domestic. It could be anything. I know what it's going to be, but you don't. So check back next Wednesday. I upload every Wednesday, and see what that's like. If you enjoyed this review of Anthony Burgess's The Wanting Seed, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, click that bell for notifications, and leave me lots of comments down below, because I enjoy reading your comments. It's always nice to hear from the viewers. In the meantime, I'll be back next week. I'm going to go do other things now. Thanks so much for watching. I've been your host, Logan Albright, and I will catch you next time.